So in this video, we're going to learn about what men really think about working with female co-workers. It could get a bit awkward, but we're going to learn both perspectives. What's a woman's kind of perspective on some of this and the corporation's perspective, and how there seems to be a common theme where society and corporations see men as such a big risk. And we're going to start with this article here that says that the death of the office Christmas party, which is saying employers may decide it's too risky as new laws increase employer responsibility for staff safety. So we start off here, it's talking about how, at Christmas party season gets underway, the legal services body RSM is reminding businesses of their increased responsibility, again, to suck the fun out of everything. The normal banter, normal conversation between people is kind of being sucked under and removed due to all this political correctness or feminism and things like this, to protect staff and against harassment rules as part of the October laws. So if you don't know, in the UK, they're always introducing some new laws to restrict people's freedom and behavior, normal healthy behavior, men's freedom, and in this case it's all these harassment prevention laws that were recently introduced to kind of restrict, again, freedom at work or in general in terms of how men engage with society. And in this particular section, it talks about how financial service firms should be particularly mindful of the new rules, as workplace harassment rules have been quite common in financial services, where the FCA, the UK financial regulator like the SEC and CFTC in America, are clamping down on these things. The Treasury Committee, so this is what I mean, you go to work, you have all these government bodies that are highly funded by high taxpayer money. The Treasury Committee, so the UK Treasury, like the Federal Reserve in America, or the Treasury Department there, they actually had to write a report around, I don't know if I can use the word here, sexism in the city or kind of misogyny at work. And it's talking about how all forms of harassment in financial services, from microaggressions, which is completely ridiculous as a concept, such as inappropriate comments or jokes around harassment or anything in relation to women, essentially is being heavily restricted. And it is so vague, some of these rules, but it looks like, let's look at some of these pieces of advice that sound cringe and make any type of social interaction for men at work quite risky. And one thing you'll notice about this, and I'll have a few other examples here, how everything's biased against controlling and constraining men, and even the mainstream bodies and governments and media and all these organizations are kind of always on the woman's side, and it's always like the man's doing something wrong. Firstly, it talks about undertaking a risk assessment. So before you have a Christmas party, you have to do a risk assessment. And this shows you how far a lot of these bogus health and safety rules go. So before you have a Christmas party, you have to do a risk assessment of areas and practices of the organization where the company might be, or the employees might be, at risk of harassment, including external premises where you might have a staff party or team building events. Everything's about risk. You can't have fun at work, which I don't mind, but it's like there's always these constraining rules. Fostering a culture where victims feel empowered to speak up. So it's like, again, I'm not victim blaming here, but it's kind of victim empowerment. Everyone can be a victim and say they've been taken advantage of. In this case, at Christmas parties, most likely women, are saying that victims need to feel empowered to speak up in confidence without fear or negative repercussions. Having formal processes in place to investigate people who are claimed to have been apparently engaged in harassment. And what this ends up doing is, if you're a man going to any corporate Christmas dinner or Christmas party, you're at risk of being accused of one thing or the other. Even a simple conversation with a woman at a Christmas party where you're drinking alcohol, the next day she could say you said something inappropriate, you did something inappropriate, and there's no real evidence supporting it, but you'll be castrated as a man in those situations and negatively impacted by that. It talks about reviewing complaints around misconduct and making sure these reviews are legally compliant, accessible, and effective. Training HR around harassment and things like that, and complaints. And then also looking at legal obligations for regulators and expectations. So just to have a Christmas party, which is meant to be somewhat of a fun event, at least where you can be a bit more fun with your co-workers. I know co-workers are not your friends, but you spend so much of your life with them. And then you have all these rules that are just like, basically, they're not going to word it that way. It's basically but saying like, anything a man can do could basically put him in a very reckless position. And that's what all these rules are about. And what we're going to do now is do something where demographic that really doesn't get its say at work these days in terms of social dynamics and the culture. Let's look at some men who have their anonymous accounts and what they actually think about working with women. I've taken these through a few videos I've watched over the year, which are quite interesting. Where to begin? I'm only a man in an all-female laboratory. The female boss lets the girls go early and leave early to pick up their kids at daycare, but expects me to work all night, so there's a bias there favoring the woman, right? All the girls eat together while I cover the lab. I end up eating alone at 2 p.m. So all the girls kind of have a nice social environment to have their lunch together, where he ends up eating alone and kind of feeling a bit isolated as a man at work. The boss sought out management training for every woman in the department, but tried to talk me out of it. So there's specialist training for women, but not for men. I find out it took me quite long to get hired for the role because the boss was eagerly searching for a female to do his job, right? So again, the hiring process is biased against men. We've seen this many cases. I've experienced this. I've seen it on both ends of the hiring aspect too. Then he says his manager, also a woman, she had to be threatened by the director to finally hire me for the role. And what is my job? It's fixing all the mistakes by female co-workers in the laboratory. Woman had Chippendale calendars, which is like male stripper calendars on the wall. When he complained, the boss told him to put it on a wall he couldn't see, these type of calendars that the females had of male strippers. When he filed a formal complaint, they threatened to move him away from the team, right, to work separately, right? He went into the federal building and filed a formal complaint, a hostile workplace complaint. And he used the word misandrist. Now, if you don't know, the opposite of misogyny is misandry. Now, most people don't know what that word is because you always hear misogyny all the times, right? But the bias against men, if you're not aware of it, is called misandry or misandrist here. And they weren't aware of these biases against men. So he's putting up with a lot of things. And whether it's the special treatment for a woman, doing extra work, picking up for their mistakes, feeling quite isolated, not being able to participate in any type of jokes and banter, because typically male culture and jokes are kind of banned. The extra training for the female employees, they're getting accelerated career growth opportunities through this specialist training. Benefits when it comes to hiring. So in what sense are women disadvantaged? I can't seem to figure it out because there's so many cases like this, right? And then he's talking about fixing all the mistakes of female employees. I've done that in many cases where I'm fixing mistakes of my female manager who'd be significantly older than me and should have more experience at making double my salary. Sometimes, female employees who would point out little mistakes I might make, which are hard to kind of even note, or just complain about things like me having a long email. They will make so many mistakes even in the same sentence. I remember at one point a female manager gave some advice to a trader on personal account trading rules, and she made 2 mistakes in one sentence. And I had to kind of go and correct it. And it was like, it's a 1-sentence email and you make 2 mistakes. But this is the type of people they put in positions of power for the sake of gender equality a lot of the time, And there's so many different examples I can give you of just inappropriate jokes and comments female employees might make at work. If you escalate it, they act like it's not a big deal and that you should just get used to it. It's just a joke. But if a man says the same thing, it'd be considered harassment in some way or form. And this is what I mean. It's kind of like there's no real equal rights if you want to complain about equality all the time. Another example, I got turned down for promotions at Dunkin' Donuts by a female district manager because, in her words, as a man, I have many other opportunities to make money. She was right, but at the time I had no other skills, which is why I was working at Dunkin' Donuts. Also, I had female co-workers who would constantly question my sexuality because I never responded to their advances and flirtations. Never mind the fact that dating or sleeping with co-workers is a recipe for disaster, or they were all, low quality drug addicted women that he was working with. It's clearly that they were kind of accusing him and questioning his manhood essentially, and he just didn't want them near him. So this is another example of, like I say, you're dealing with a female manager as a bias against you, even though she's your manager making more money than you. She's kind of thinking you're a male employee who's more junior than her, but you're somehow have more opportunities and you're more oppressive than she is as a manager. It's completely weird brainwash dynamics that you constantly have to deal with. He's talking about never responding to their advances or flirtations, and this is what it comes down to. You go to work as a man, if you don't discuss your personal life, people are always, or female colleagues I've noticed, they're always trying to delve into everyone's personal life. Like, are you dating? Are you married? Things like that. And it's kind of weird. They always like this type of gossipy culture, and if you don't want to engage in it as a man, they're going to kind of, like I say, accuse you of being gay in his case, right? Or they're trying to make little negative jokes or cheap shots against you. There's a bias or a negativity that comes with mainstream society and how it perceives single men, but single women are super empowered and super good. So it's completely ridiculous. And there is that phrase, don't shit where you eat, which is basically, don't be in a relationship with a coworker. So it's good he's avoiding that, but he's still dealing with kind of negative feedback around just working and keeping his personal life personal and not flirting with coworkers. So it's like a lose-to-lose situation in these type of scenarios. Here's another example. Back in the first half of the 1990s, I worked in federal government department, and in my final year, I was put on a loan to a unit which was 100% female until I got there, of course. The first day I was there, the woman sitting at the station beside me started to make rude comments pertaining to my gender. I told her I wasn't going to stand for this, and her response is, well, my husband takes the male bashing, as if that really had anything to do with me. Another time she told me, in reference to a shirt or sweater I had picked up for her husband, your eyes aren't as nice as his though. I said, well, each to their own. By that time, I just thought to myself, yeah, I don't want to put up with this. Another time, I asked her why she needed to engage in this type of male-bashing behaviour. She slowly turned to me with a stunned look on her face and said, well, it's just for fun. A few weeks later, the weather got warmer, and she asked some inappropriate questions, like when am I going to wear short shorts to work. One of the other ladies in the unit were 7 months pregnant, and I was immediately chosen to carry all the heavy trays of paperwork and desks and things like that. And I had no problem with that, although I didn't like her attitude. And when she got off the phone that one time with her husband, she was sneering and complaining and whinging about men. Then finally one day, she really showed her true colours, a conversation between 2 or 3 female employees about weight loss and things like that. And then he said, oh, I can think of a couple candidates, a couple co-workers who could lose their weight or watch their weight as in Weight Watchers. 2 of the female co-workers immediately snapped. The ringleader wasted no time in telling me that I better watch my step. I tried to explain to her that I wasn't referring to them specifically. Then another female employee sitting across looked down at me and saying, we can get away with it, but you can't, in terms of the female employees can make negative comments about male employees, but not the other way around. Remember, this was in a federal government department with a workplace harassment policy posted on the wall on the main floor for all to see. During International Women's Day, one of the things it prides itself on is zero tolerance to harassment. So what do you suppose the chances are for the good controlled media, ironically or sarcastically, telling the world about all of this? So he's got a good example here, right? He's talking about, and this is something I've seen, where female employees at work, they have these simp beta male husbands who will put up with these typical bashing comments, typical negative comments from female co-workers from their wives, and their wives come to work and think they can talk down to men the same way they do to men in their personal lives. And they've ruined it for everyone else. All these kind of, like I say, these weak husbands or weak boyfriends, because women think they can walk all over them, then they can walk all over their male co-workers. And my first piece of advice for you would be to make a note of all these instances and when they occur, so you can protect yourself. She mentioned she's just making fun of men, and it's done in jest, it's done in fun. See, the thing is, you don't want to put up with those jokes, and what everyone else gets to put up with is personally down to their personal choice. But when you're at work, you're going to have to tolerate this type of anti-male bias. And they're not going to put up with your jokes if you make a joke about a woman's age or a woman's weight, but she wants to make a joke about your age or weight or things like that. And then there's a little comment there about when you're going to wear short shorts to work, a woman joking about this type of objectification of men, but you can't make the same jokes against them. When there's manual labour, picking up desks, moving heavy trays, there's still an expectation for a man to pursue or provide his gender role of using his strength to help a woman move desks, move heavy equipment around in the office, but a woman doesn't have any expectation to fulfill her gender role. And then there's a lot of trauma dumping. He's talking about this female co-worker had a conversation with her husband on the phone, then she ends the phone call whinging about men. A lot of female co-workers, they end up trauma dumping their negativity in their personal relationship with men and bringing that to work and whinging about that, and everyone has to listen to it. All male co-workers have to provide some kind of support or put up with her negativity and emotional nature about this. And these negative comments about men are kind of normalized in the workplace, right? And then she talks about them, how he made one slight comment and they told him he better watch his step and not say anything inappropriate. The thing is, men are not as naive as previous generations. Many men now are putting up with this double standard, and they're getting fed up with it. So it's kind of interesting that he's pointing out these instances. Now, when he mentions it's a federal government with specific policies, that's the thing. All these companies and government entities, they have these policies around gender equality, but it really ends up being a bias in favor of women. Government, mainstream media, woke corporations, they're all aware and enforce this type of bias to gender. Here we have another story. I currently work in a female-dominated workplace in the medical field. About 85 to 90% of women and all the higher-ups in my department are women. There's no men in the leadership roles. As a man, you really have to watch what you say and who is around and who you say it, especially with woke feminists and the Me Too movement hitting the male-female dynamics quite hard. I have noticed that women will sit there and talk about anything, even things that would be considered inappropriate for the workplace without hesitation because no one's going to restrict their behaviour the same way they restrict a man's behaviour. If a man decided to bring up any of those topics, we'd get a phone call within an hour from HR to have a discussion in their office and be scolded for expressing opinions. Most of the people I work with consider me aloof and not so friendly, but at the end of the day, I'm protecting my career. I spent over the 22 years building this career. One complaint from a woman could ruin my entire career and income sources. I have seen it happen personally to other men. No woman is worth that loss. So that's, again, another interesting example, right? He's working in the medical industry. I've worked in finance. I've given you many examples in my through my videos from the tech industry too, people who worked in government we just saw before this. So there's a consistent theme here, right? Woke feminist, the soy boy, simp, bugman character. They get away with saying a lot of the things they want to say, but as a man, you can't say so many things, right? There's a bias against men, straight men, conservatives, white men in many cases, Asians too, and black men too. And I noticed an example of this I'll give you, right? I remember being at work and a male co-worker made a joke about what Trump said around 2016, when he talked about grabbing women by the pussy, things like that. And he made a joke about him doing it himself, right? And he's a liberal, effeminate, champagne socialist type of man. So when he makes the joke, it's okay. But if Trump makes it, it's super crazy. If you make it and you don't have the right political opinions, or you're one of their type of men, like I say, a liberal man, you're going to have it rigged against you, right? So you've got to be extra careful on how you engage in these type of workplace environments, right? You could get cancelled at any moment, including a Christmas party. So it's really careful how you have to conduct yourself at work. Anything could be considered inappropriate or toxic. Anything that the female employees kind of feel is okay, they can say, and they know men can't say the same. In many ways, HR and their type of restrictions, they're like hounds for the feminists, in the sense they're all like protective hounds, like a dog, right? That will go and chase you like a guard dog if you say anything that questions these biased norms against you. And when they talk about him being aloof but hardworking to protect his 22-year career, see, this is what I mean. There's one thing to have your freedom of speech restricted at work and bias against you at work, but it's another thing when it restricts your ability to really progress your career and have a high earning potential, right? If women want to chit chat and make inappropriate comments about men in their personal lives while at work, that's one thing. But when you have to kind of constantly be on guard as men, you can't be friendly at work. And I don't mean friendly in an inappropriate way, but I mean being professional and building relationships at work, professional relationships, because it could backfire. It ends up restricting your ability to progress your career because everything's so constrained on how you can conduct yourself. And then you end up kind of wanting to drop out the workforce or kind of be quiet and be meek, which are completely unnatural things for men to do in a workplace where they want to work hard and succeed. Last example here, right? There was a female businesswoman. She created a company which was for women, staffed by women, and it didn't go well. There was backstabbing, talking about clothes, makeup of others, where there wasn't any work being done. The owner had to fly back from the US to the UK to micromanage because nothing was being done. She employed a guy who was already married at the time. They flirted with him and tried to sleep with him. He did sleep with one of them, and it cost him his marriage. Things were so bad, she closed down the company in the end because no one was doing any actual work. So a lot of these type of petty kind of high school teenage girl politics end up playing out in the workplace too. Backstabbing, over focus on appearance, validation and attention rather than being productive and doing the work. You might sense, but you try not to get involved in, but they still try to leverage all the unspoken social dynamics in their advantage. Now, what ends up happening is there's losses for a company, there's growth inefficiencies, lack of career progress for many men, not a lot of work done. And it ends up being like a lot of drama, and it's quite interesting because I remember I knew someone and she worked at a female beauty salon, and she was talking about how she wanted more male co-workers there and men in management because there was too much petty drama between some of the female co-workers, and a lot of women didn't like working with other women and they were looking for a strong male leader. So that really does make you think. If we go back to that last little part here about the headline, death of the office Christmas party. Employers may decide it's too risky, and new laws increase employer responsibility for staff safety. Everything's kind of been ruined in the workplace and your broader society because of this political correctness and bias against men. Now, if you're dealing with difficult scenarios at work, I've worked for over a decade, top corporate roles across investment banking, sales and trading, and so on. And I offer career advice, link in description if you want to speak with me directly. Let me know in the comments as a man, what do you think about working with some female co-workers? Of course, some of them are fine, but some of them really, they do have a negative impact, and the system's never backing you. The governments, the corporations, all the employment laws, it's always backing the woman and not backing you. Let me know how you feel about it in the comments. 2 recommended videos on the screen right now, and I'll see you next time.